Imagine discovering a place built by people whose names vanished thousands of years ago, yet whose work still refuses to reveal its purpose. No surviving record explains why it was created, how its design was calculated, or what happened to those who once gathered there. Only fragments remain: sealed chambers, unexplained symbols, impossible alignments, and traces of rituals no one can reconstruct. Researchers can measure every surface and date every layer, but evidence often deepens the mystery instead of solving it. Each answer exposes another contradiction, suggesting that the past was far more complex than the story preserved in books. These ancient sites are not silent because they have nothing to tell us. They are silent because we may have forgotten how to understand them. The Antikythera wreck is known for one extraordinary machine, yet the greater archaeological mystery may be the dismantled world that sank beside it. More than 24 bronze and marble statues were being carried across the Mediterranean when the vessel disappeared beneath the sea, but they were not created at the same time, may not have come from the same place, and may not even have traveled aboard the same ship. Some have lost the objects that once revealed their identities. Others survive only as detached hands, heads, and weapons, while complete bronze figures may remain trapped beneath massive boulders. The discovery of a second wreck, only 200 meters away, has now made the cargo harder to explain. This may not have been a merchant casually transporting expensive art. Someone may have dismantled an entire Greek monument and attempted to rebuild its visual world somewhere else. Greek sponge divers encountered the wreck in 1900 at a depth of roughly 45 to 50 meters off Antikythera. They saw bronze faces, marble limbs, heroes and horses scattered down a steep underwater slope. The recovery of 1900 to 1901 raised 36 marble sculptures and major bronzes, including the Antikythera youth and the head, called the Antikythera philosopher. But the work preceded modern underwater mapping. Objects were removed without precise records of their positions, stripping the collection of the spatial relationships that might have shown which figures belonged together. The proposed dates of the sculptures stretch from the 4th century BC through the Hellenistic age, while the vessel sank around 70 to 50 BC. Some works may already have been 3 centuries old when loaded. A merchant could have assembled fashionable Greek antiquities from several markets, yet a recent reassessment offers a more intriguing possibility. The figures resemble the varied programs displayed in a Greek gymnasium, where gods, heroes, athletes, rulers, and intellectuals shared one architectural setting. If that interpretation is correct, the cargo may preserve an institution deliberately taken apart. The ship was not simply moving ornaments, it was transporting the visual memory of a public building, possibly so that its cultural world could be reconstructed for a new owner elsewhere. The Antikythera youth shows how one missing detail can erase an identity. Cast in bronze, approximately 1.96 meters tall, and dated to about 340 to 330 BC, the figure extends his right arm as though presenting something. That object is gone. An apple would suggest Paris, the head of Medusa could identify Perseus. Another attribute would produce a different hero. It may have been detached for transport, broken away during the sinking, or remain unidentified below. The so-called philosopher presents the opposite problem. His tangled hair, beard, and tense expression preserve a distinctive bronze face, but without an inscription or secure body, he could be a philosopher, poet, or statesman. One figure retains a body without its identifying object. The other retains a face without the name ancient viewers once knew. The colossal marble Heracles demonstrates how far one statue could be dispersed. Its headless body, about 2.5 meters tall, was raised in 1901. A left hand appeared in 2016, and in 2022, archaeologists removing boulders recovered a bearded head roughly 65 centimeters high, probably belonging to the same figure. More than a century separated pieces of one body. Statues may have shattered during impact, slid down the submerged slope, and later been divided by sediment and rockfalls. Unmatched bronze arms, fingers, spears, and other fragments may therefore be the exposed edges of sculptures that have never been seen intact. Such fragments matter because ancient Greek bronzes rarely survived antiquity. Metal figures were repeatedly melted and reused, erasing thousands of works. The sea accidentally protected the Antikythera cargo from that fate. A bronze arm recovered in 2017, together with large sculptural weapons and pieces detected within the site, led investigators to suspect that several life-sized bronzes remain trapped below. Estimates based on visible fragments have suggested at least 7 additional figures. Archaeologists cannot simply lift every boulder. At nearly 50 meters depth, moving multi-ton rocks risks damaging the objects and the divers. The wreck remains an archive whose catalogue is physically sealed. Coins and amphorae provide a direction but no address. 36 silver and roughly 40 bronze coins recovered during Jacques Cousteau's 1976 expedition include issues linked with Pergamon and Ephesus, while jars point to Chios and Rhodes. Yet coins circulated, containers were reused, and ships visited multiple ports. The statues could be purchases for a Roman villa, property sold from a sanctuary or gymnasion, works displaced by political upheaval, or monuments appropriated beneath the appearance of trade. The discovery of another wreck makes even the idea of a single cargo uncertain. Research in 2024 confirmed a second concentration of pottery and the remains of a wooden vessel approximately 200 meters from the principal site. Similar ceramics occur in both zones, but their relationship is unresolved. They may represent unrelated accidents along the same dangerous passage, a large ship and an accompanying craft, or 2 cargo vessels overwhelmed by one storm. If both transported sculpture, detached limbs assigned to one collection might come from different ships. The unusual mixture of dates and styles could partly result from 2 cargoes becoming archaeologically entangled on the same underwater slope. The mystery is therefore not just who the statues depict, but whether archaeologists have reconstructed the event correctly. Was one Roman patron importing masterpieces for a villa? Was a dealer assembling pieces for several clients? Had officials removed the sculptural program of a Greek civic building? Or were 2 ships carrying different collections whose remains have been mistaken for one? The famous machine reveals what ancient knowledge could build, but the statues preserve a different loss. Bodies without attributes, faces without names, and a possible monument without its architecture. Beneath the boulders may lie the figure, inscription, or base that connects them. Until it is recovered, Antikythera remains not only the wreck of a ship, but the unfinished excavation of a world someone tried to move. The most puzzling feature of Kerma is not the enormous mud brick monument that still rises above its ruins, but the ground beneath it. For almost 1,000 years, successive generations appear to have returned to the same small area, replacing one sacred building with another, while the settlement around it grew into the capital of a kingdom. The earlier structure was comparatively modest, described by excavators as a primitive sanctuary. Chapels, storerooms, and workshops were later added around it, followed by increasingly massive constructions that culminated in the western Defufa. Yet no surviving Kerman text identifies the deity honored there, explains what made that exact location sacred, or tells us why rebuilding elsewhere was apparently unacceptable. Kerma may therefore preserve something more elusive than a ruined temple, the physical outline of a belief maintained for centuries after its original meaning had disappeared from the archaeological record. The city lies near the third cataract of the Nile in northern Sudan and gave its name to a culture that flourished from roughly 2450 to 1480 BC. George Reisner, who excavated parts of Kerma between 1913 and 1916, interpreted it largely through an Egyptian framework. Excavations directed by Charles Bonnet from the 1970s onward overturned that picture, exposing an indigenous capital with houses, defenses, palaces, bakeries, magazines, and specialized workshops. Kerma exchanged objects and ideas with Egypt, but it was not an Egyptian city transplanted into Nubia. That correction created a harder problem. Its distinct political and religious systems must be reconstructed from architecture rather than read in the words of their creators. The Western Defufa became the most visible expression of this system. Built from sun-dried mud brick, it rose to approximately 20 meters and dominated the religious quarter. Much of its enormous mass consists of dense brickwork around restricted internal spaces, while stairs led toward elevated rooms and a roof platform. It consumed immense labor without creating a large congregation hall, suggesting that height, visibility, and controlled access mattered more than floor area. It could have concealed ceremonies or elevated a small ritual group above the city. Repeated alterations are visible, but archaeology cannot determine whether each rebuilding preserved the same cult, replaced an earlier order, or enclosed a revered predecessor. An even stranger building stood about 50 meters away. Usually called the Great Hut, it was a monumental rounded structure about 14 meters across in one phase. Successive versions expanded from roughly 13 to 18 meters, while preserving essentially the same plan. Archaeologists call it a royal audience chamber, but no inscription or surviving throne confirms that identification. Kerma's builders could produce rectangular palaces, yet they retained a form resembling an enlarged indigenous hut for this important building. It may have invoked an ancestral dwelling, seated leaders around a shared center, or marked the king as guardian of an older tradition. Instead of imitating Egypt, Kerma may have transformed a familiar African domestic form into political architecture. The city appears to have controlled how people approached both centers. During Middle Kerma, its defended core occupied approximately 170 by 170 meters and had 6 differently oriented entrances. Walls, bastions, and ditches changed as the settlement expanded beyond 20 hectares by the end of Classic Kerma. A major avenue crossed it, but routes toward the center became confined passages. Larger residences occupied the approaches, while kitchens and silos lay inside enclosed compounds. Movement was filtered before anyone reached the Defufa or Great Hut. Whether this served defense, procession, social separation, or all three remains unresolved. The central metropolis may even have been reserved largely for the royal elite, leaving much of its supporting population archaeologically uncertain. 4 kilometers east, the cemetery shows how far that authority may have extended. Covering about 70 hectares, it is estimated to contain around 40,000 graves. Modest early burials gradually gave way to pits 10 or 15 meters wide, and royal tumuli approaching 90 meters in diameter. Grave 253 contained 4,899 bucrania, the frontal bones and horns of cattle, arranged before the tomb. Among them were 560 animals whose horns had been trained to grow forward. Cut marks prove that some animals were modified during life. Cows, calves, bulls, and oxen were placed in ordered rows, turning thousands of animals into a structured display. Carbon and nitrogen isotopes indicate that some cattle consumed diets associated with different environments. The funeral may therefore have gathered herds from separate territories as tribute, obligation, or allied participation. The cemetery becomes an indirect map of a kingdom whose borders remain uncertain. The Great Hut might then have received local chiefs, cattle-owning lineages, or distant representatives. Alternatively, these were royal herds maintained to display wealth. The evidence proves organization on a remarkable scale, but not whether Kerma was a centralized monarchy, a ritual federation, or a system outside modern categories. Egyptian expansion ended Kerma's independence in the mid-2nd millennium BC, as New Kingdom authority seized Upper Nubia. Egyptian records celebrate campaigns against Kush, but describe Kerma only from outside. They do not preserve its gods, the ceremonies performed on the Defufa, the status of those admitted to the Great Hut, or the story that made one patch of ground sacred for almost a millennium. What survives is a city organized around restricted movement, monumental rebuilding, and deliberate continuity. Kerma's deepest mystery is not lost technology, but how a kingdom preserved the architecture of its identity for centuries while losing the belief that held the entire plan together. The most extraordinary mystery of Eleusis is not simply what the initiates were shown, but how thousands could have seen it at all. The final ceremony unfolded inside the telesterion, a nearly square hall measuring about 51.5 meters on each side. 8 tiers of stone seating ran along all 4 walls, yet 42 columns supported its enormous roof. There was no stage, no single front, and no unobstructed view shared by everyone. Near the center stood the Anakteron, a restricted structure accessible only to the priesthood and believed to have contained sacred objects. If the climax depended on something revealed there, much of the audience saw it through a forest of columns, from different angles, or not clearly at all. Archaeology has preserved a contradiction. The greatest initiation hall of ancient Greece appears poorly designed for everyone to witness the same revelation. The Eleusinian Mysteries honored Demeter and Persephone at Eleusis, roughly 20 kilometers northwest of Athens. Their outer framework was public. Candidates prepared themselves, sacred objects were transported, and a procession followed the sacred way from Athens. Men, women, and even enslaved people could be initiated. What happened inside the telesterion was protected by a prohibition ancient writers observed with remarkable consistency. Later descriptions reduce it to 3 categories: things performed, things spoken, and things shown. These reveal the structure of an event, but not its content. Were thousands expected to watch one object, follow a moving performance, hear a declaration, or undergo a sequence in which sight was only one part? The building makes a conventional answer difficult. Pairs of entrances opened through its east, north, and south sides, while the seats faced inward from 4 directions. The roof supports were arranged in 6 rows of 7, with a second, lighter order of columns above. A raised opening called the opaion admitted limited light and ventilation. This was not an open Greek theatre where spectators watched a stage in daylight. It resembled a roofed theatre without a stage, filled with darkness, smoke, footsteps, voices, and torches. The columns that kept the roof standing also divided the audience's vision into fragments. This may have been an unavoidable engineering compromise, but the ceremony may have learned to use it. A sudden light near the Anakteron could transform the room without exposing every detail of the object responsible. A voice could travel farther than a small relic could be seen. Figures moving between columns would appear and disappear as initiates turned toward different points. The Apeon may have released smoke and heat, but its role during the nighttime rites remains uncertain. Reconstructions of the hall's acoustics suggest that hard surfaces and numerous supports created a complicated sound field rather than modern auditory clarity. One ancient rhetorical anecdote even mentions an initiate who followed the action but could not hear the sacred words and therefore believed his initiation incomplete. The climax may not have required a perfectly visible display. It may have been created through the timing of speech, action, darkness, and light. The object supposedly revealed has also escaped identification. The Hierophant was the person who displayed sacred things, yet no excavated artifact can be securely identified as the supreme secret. A Christian author writing centuries later claimed that an ear of grain was displayed in silence, but this late, hostile testimony cannot reconstruct the ceremony. The Ninian tablet, a painted terracotta plaque dated to the 4th century BC and discovered in 1895, depicts initiates, torches, Demeter, Persephone, and Iacchus. It offers rare visual evidence, but stops before the decisive interior moment. Archaeology has recovered inscriptions, vessels, votive objects, and sacred imagery, while the object everyone wants remains absent or unrecognized among ordinary finds. The telesterion itself did not belong to one unchanging age. Beneath its later remains, archaeologists found the Mycenaean Megaron B complex, dating broadly to the 2nd millennium BC. Pottery, figurines, animal remains, and domestic material complicate its interpretation. It may have combined elite residence with religious activity. This does not prove that the classical mysteries already existed in their later form. Instead, it suggests that generations repeatedly rebuilt sacred space over an older center of authority. Physical continuity could then support claims of ancestral continuity even if the rites evolved. The sanctuary grew from a local cult center into a pan-Hellenic and eventually Roman institution, and each enlargement changed the physical experience of initiation. Destruction repeatedly interrupted that development. Persian forces damaged the sanctuary in the early 5th century BC. The telesterion was rebuilt and enlarged, and an eastern portico with 12 Doric columns was added in the late 4th century BC. The Costa Bocco devastated Eleusis in AD 170, after which Marcus Aurelius supported reconstruction. Each rebuilding preserved the sanctuary's prestige, but may have altered entrances, crowd size, sightlines, lighting, and sound. Did one secret survive unchanged while its architecture transformed, or did the ritual adapt while its guardians continued to present it as ancient? When the mysteries vanished near the end of the 4th century AD, the final secret was not merely an object waiting to be excavated. The loss of the priesthood also erased instructions for directing attention, where figures moved, when words were spoken, how long darkness lasted, and at what instant light entered the hall. Ruins preserve dimensions and column bases, but they cannot preserve timing. The telesterion can therefore be measured with extraordinary precision, while its purpose remains resistant to reconstruction. Its 51.5-meter walls, 42 supports, 6 entrances, and 8 tiers of seating tell us where people gathered, but not what an initiate hidden behind the 5th column actually perceived. The deepest mystery of Eleusis is how obstructed sight and uncertain sound were transformed into a shared conviction powerful enough to survive for centuries, and why a building full of visual barriers became the ancient Mediterranean's most celebrated place of revelation. The most disturbing possibility surrounding the Chinchorro mummies is that their tradition may have been created by one poison and later transformed by another. Thousands of years before embalming became associated with kings, Atacama fishing communities began rebuilding dead infants with sticks, clay, fibers, skin, and mineral paint. The earliest examples appeared where drinking water contained extreme concentrations of arsenic. Millennia later, black manganese used to color the dead was accumulating inside the bones of the living. No Chinchorro text explains whether either danger was understood. Did environmental poisoning compel these people to preserve their children, only for the ritual itself to poison those who performed it? The Chinchorro occupied the coast of northern Chile and southern Peru from approximately 5450 to 890 BC. Their world survives through shell middens, harpoons, reed mats, cemeteries, and bodies protected by the Atacama. Some corpses dried naturally, but others were reconstructed. Preparers removed soft tissues, repositioned bones, reinforced them with wooden rods, and restored missing volume with clay, reeds, animal hair, and plant fibers. They modeled a new surface, attached a human hair wig, shaped a face, and painted the figure. This was not simply a corpse protected from decay, but a new body manufactured around human remains. The earliest elaborate treatment was not reserved for chiefs or successful hunters. Some of the first artificially prepared individuals from Camarones were fetuses, premature babies, and young children. The Camarones River has carried arsenic concentrations approaching 1,000 micrograms per liter, roughly 100 times the modern guideline of 10. Chronic exposure can cross the placenta and is associated with miscarriage, premature birth, low birth weight, and infant mortality. A small population repeatedly losing children may have faced a continuing demographic and emotional crisis. Artificial mummification could have begun as an attempt to give an incomplete life a permanent body, to make visible a child whom death had barely allowed to enter the community. The evidence stops before motive. Archaeologists cannot calculate the exact mortality rate 7,000 years ago, while arsenic cannot explain why grief assumed this technically demanding form. Other communities suffered infant loss without rebuilding bodies. No one knows whether the earliest children represented particular families, unusual deaths, ancestral claims, or a belief that unborn individuals already possessed complete personhood. Toxic water and infant mummies occupy the same landscape. The intention connecting them has disappeared. The black mummy technique reveals how much knowledge the ritual demanded. The skeleton was dismantled, strengthened, returned to anatomical order, coated with modeling paste, and covered in manganese-rich pigment. Open eyes, mouths, sexual features, and wigs returned identity to a body first reduced almost to bone. Later red mummies were treated differently. Internal tissues were removed through incisions, while more original skin remained. Cavities were packed, and red iron oxide covered the exterior. These methods overlapped and disappeared rather than forming a simple progression, suggesting changes in meaning that chronology cannot recover. Burial may have been only the final stage of a longer relationship. Some mummies show repaired damage, renewed surfaces, or retouched faces. Their rigid construction and shallow placement near residential areas have led researchers to suggest that they were displayed, handled, or transported before interment. Yet no preserved ceremony reveals how. Were they kept inside shelters, brought into gatherings, or moved between camps? Did repainting renew the deceased's identity or repair damage caused by repeated handling? Archaeology can identify maintenance, but it cannot reveal when a Chinchorro individual was considered finally dead. Human hair wigs, deepen the uncertainty. Hair placed on babies may have come from relatives, although DNA testing has not established this. If a parent's hair formed part of a reconstructed child, one figure joined material from the living and dead. Were the Chinchorro preserving individuals, manufacturing ancestors, or turning vulnerable bodies into permanent members of the group? None explains why some received elaborate reconstruction while others did not. Analysis of bones from 68 Chinchorro individuals found manganese above the normal concentration of 1 part per million in 57, approximately 84%. 14, 20.6%, contained at least 10 parts per million, interpreted as high toxic exposure. Comparisons with cemetery soil and SEM-EDX analysis indicated that the result was not simply contamination after burial. No meaningful difference appeared between men and women, suggesting both may have handled manganese or lived around its extraction, grinding, and refinement. Inhaled manganese dust can damage the nervous system and cause tremors, rigidity, and symptoms resembling Parkinsonism. The mineral that gave the dead their permanent black surface may have been silently changing the bodies of the living. Around 4,450 years before present, black mummies gave way to a red style, and manganese became more restricted, often to the head. Was this a new religious identity, an easier technique, a territorial signal, or recognition that the mineral caused illness? Nothing proves the Chinchorro understood chronic poisoning. Generations of pigment grinders might nevertheless have noticed recurring sickness without knowing its cause. The decline of elaborate mummification may also reflect horticulture, incoming populations, changing settlements, or new ideas about ancestry. The evidence cannot isolate one explanation. The Chinchorro mystery is therefore greater than the familiar claim that their mummies predate Egypt. Why did a society without monuments devote monumental labor to ordinary dead? Why do vulnerable children appear near the beginning? And why might completed bodies have remained among the living? Arsenic may have multiplied the losses that inspired the ritual. Grief may have transformed those losses into reconstructed bodies. Manganese may then have imposed a hidden cost on those maintaining them. Each stage has evidence, but the chain remains unproven. The Chinchorro created bodies designed to endure after memory disappeared, preserving everything except the reason they were made. The Laetoli footprints are the only evidence for a possible human relative that may have existed 3.66 million years ago, yet left no known bones, tools, or trace of its body beyond 5 abnormal steps. Laetoli is usually introduced through the elegant trails at Site G, where 3 hominins walked upright across wet volcanic ash. But those famous tracks are not the site's deepest problem. 2 years before Site G was uncovered, Peter Jones and Philip Leakey found a shorter trail at Site A. 5 prints made by a creature moving on 2 legs, placing 1 foot across the body's midline as if balancing on a rope. For decades it was dismissed as the work of a bear. Its re-excavation has raised a far more disruptive possibility. A second kind of hominin, with different feet and a different walk, may have crossed the same Tanzanian landscape as the species associated with Lucy. Laetoli lies near the southern Serengeti in northern Tanzania, within volcanic sediments rich in Pliocene fossils. Ash fell over the ground. Moisture turned its surface into a material capable of holding impressions, and later, deposits sealed the tracks. The footprint tuff preserves tracks made by mammals, birds, and insects. Site A occupied roughly 490 square meters, containing about 18,400 animal prints, ranging from guinea fowl to elephants. Nearby tracks retained recognizable edges, making it difficult to blame the unknown walker's unusual form entirely on damaged ash. Site A was discovered in 1976, but attention shifted after Mary Leakey's team exposed Site G in 1978. The trail demonstrated committed bipedal movement long before the genus Homo. G1 walked beside the larger G2, while G3 placed many feet over G2's impressions. Australopithecus afarensis is the only hominin taxon identified from the upper Laetoli beds, so the trails became associated with that species. Popular reconstructions made them a family fleeing an eruption, although the prints cannot establish sex, kinship, fear, or that they crossed together. Site A would not fit that story. Its maker had broad feet, short steps, and a cross-stepping gait. Researchers proposed three explanations: the substrate distorted ordinary prints, a juvenile bear briefly walked upright, or another hominin made them. Bears seemed plausible because trained circus bears could leave short, broad impressions on their hind limbs. Yet the original prints had never been fully cleaned, so their internal anatomy remained obscured. Its classification may therefore have rested on missing information. Researchers relocated Site A in 2019, removed its fill, and exposed all 5 impressions for photography, measurement, and 3-dimensional scanning. Cleaning revealed a broad heel, a large big toe, and a second digit. That arrangement resembled hominins more than bears, whose feet are fan-shaped, and whose 5th digit is normally the largest. The team compared the prints with tracks made by chimpanzees, humans, and American black bears. 4 juvenile bears were encouraged to cross mud on 2 legs, while 50.9 hours of wild bear video were examined. Unsupported bipedal posture and movement occupied only 0.09% of the footage. Only once did a bear take 4 unsupported steps. Researchers estimated the chance of observing 4 consecutive bipedal steps at 0.003%. A bear remained possible, but 5 uninterrupted prints without a transition from 4 legs became increasingly hard to explain. The cross-stepping, once considered evidence against a human relative, became part of the case for one. Bears and chimpanzees walking upright swing their mass from side to side and maintain a wide base because of their hips and knees. Humans sometimes cross 1 foot over the midline after a disturbance to regain balance. Site A may record instability on uneven ground, but its narrow trail implies inward-angled knees, adducted hips, or both, traits consistent with habitual bipedalism. Its body appears to have been adapted to movement on 2 legs. That result did not identify the walker. Digital comparisons showed that Site A differed from the accepted hominin tracks at Sites G and S in foot proportions, 3-dimensional shape, and gait. The evidence points in 2 uncomfortable directions. The maker resembles a hominin more than a bear, yet it does not resemble the hominins assigned to A. Afarensis. No skeleton was found at the trail's end, and no teeth or limb bones can be tied directly to it. 5 imperfect prints cannot justify a new species, but assigning them automatically to the only known species creates the opposite error. Site S made the landscape stranger. Excavations in 2015, about 150 meters from Site G, exposed 14 hominin prints attributed to 2 individuals. One trail, S1, may have extended approximately 32 meters. Its maker was estimated to stand about 1.65 meters tall, more than 20 centimeters taller than the largest Site G walker. The estimate is not exact, but the variation is substantial. It may reflect strong sexual dimorphism within A's afarensis, differences in age, or greater biological diversity than the bones suggest. Sites G and S may represent at least 5 walkers, although discontinuities between the exposures prevent proof that every trail was made on precisely the same surface or at the same moment. Laetoli therefore records more than the origin of upright walking. It may preserve several solutions to it. Site G shows a relatively direct gait, Site S unexpectedly large bodies, and Site A a small cross-stepping biped that cannot be matched securely to any known species. If all belonged to A. afarensis, that species possessed a wider range of feet, sizes, and locomotor behavior than its skeletons reveal. If Site A belonged to another taxon, at least two hominin lineages were using different forms of bipedalism in the same region 3.66 million years ago. 5 footprints cannot reveal whether their maker met the others, competed with them, or belonged to a lineage that vanished without descendants. They preserve no face and offer no name, yet they show how an unknown creature placed its feet, shifted its balance, and moved through the ash. That is the unresolved mystery of Laetoli. Science can describe the walk in remarkable detail and explain why a bear is unlikely, but it still cannot identify the walker. Beyond the 5th impression the trail ends, and an entire missing branch of the human story may end with it. The Georgia Guidestones were not ancient, yet they may have been deliberately constructed to become ancient. Their anonymous designer combined multilingual inscriptions, astronomical alignments, buried message traditions, and enormous blocks of granite into a monument intended to outlive modern civilization. But when the structure was destroyed in 2022, investigators discovered that one of its most important promises, a time capsule supposedly buried beneath it, may never have existed. The deeper mystery is no longer simply who ordered the monument. It is whether the entire structure was an experiment designed to manipulate the archaeologists of the future. The experiment began in June 1979, when a stranger entered the Elberton Granite Finishing Company in northeastern Georgia. Calling himself Robert C. Christian, he admitted that the name was false and claimed to represent a group that had planned the project for about 20 years. He brought a scale model and detailed specifications for a compass, calendar, clock, and survival message. On March 22, 1980, the structure was unveiled on a high point in Elbert County. 6 pieces of granite rose about 19 feet 3 inches and weighed 237,746 pounds, nearly 108 metric tons. 4 outer slabs surrounded a central pillar beneath a capstone. Elberton could build it. The mystery was why modern machinery had manufactured something apparently awaiting discovery in a remote future. 10 principles were carved across the 8 faces of the outer stones in English, Spanish, Swahili, Hindi, Hebrew, Arabic, Chinese, and Russian. The arrangement recalled Behistun, whose Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian texts carried royal authority across different populations. Yet the Guidestones addressed survivors of a world in which schools, archives, and perhaps writing itself had collapsed. They supplied no alphabet chart, number system, illustrations, or linguistic key. Anyone able to read them would already possess much of the culture the stones were meant to replace. Anyone unable to do so would see only artificial marks. They preserved commands for rebuilding society, but not the means to recover their meaning. The capstone made the contradiction stranger. The sentence, "Let these be guidestones to an age of reason," appeared in Babylonian cuneiform, Classical Greek, Sanskrit, and Egyptian hieroglyphs. These scripts did not contain the 10 principles and could not function as a Rosetta Stone. Their practical value was minimal, but their symbolic power was immense. They placed a Cold War document inside the visual language of vanished civilizations. The designer may have understood something archaeology repeatedly demonstrates: age creates authority. Instructions carved into granite can cease to resemble one group's ideology and begin to look like inherited wisdom. Every script was chosen at the same time, yet without modern records, their mixture could easily be mistaken for evidence of several historical phases. Its astronomical features planted a second kind of evidence. A channel through the center pointed toward Polaris. A vertical slot followed the sun around the solstices and equinoxes, while a hole about 7/8 of an inch wide admitted a noon ray onto the central stone. The outer slabs were described as marking the limits of the moon's approximately 18.6-year declination cycle. These devices revealed direction and celestial motion, but could not identify a year or reconstruct a complete calendar. Their strongest function may have been interpretive. Archaeologists test monuments for solar and lunar alignment. Here, such testing was guaranteed to reveal intentional geometry, leading investigators toward a role chosen in advance by the designer. The most provocative clue was supposedly underground. A granite tablet announced a time capsule, placed 6 feet below this spot, but spaces for the burial and opening dates remained blank. For 42 years, those unfinished lines suggested that records, artifacts, or an explanation waited beneath the Georgia clay. The idea resembled ancient foundation deposits. Sumerian builders concealed inscribed pegs, figurines, tablets, and offerings below temples or inside walls, beyond the sight of ordinary worshippers. Some honored gods, others anticipated a future ruler finding an older foundation during reconstruction. The Guidestones promised the same encounter, a visible monument directing later people toward a hidden message that might explain the first. That encounter occurred only because the monument failed. At about 4 a.m. on July 6, 2022, an explosive device shattered one upright and damaged the capstone. Authorities demolished the unstable remainder later that day. Crews dug about 6 feet beneath the tablet and reached tightly packed red clay, finding neither a capsule nor evidence of an earlier opening. Was the deposit planned and abandoned, secretly removed, or never buried? Or was the promise itself the mechanism, a sentence designed to make future people excavate an absence and treat it as significant? The demolition completed the experiment unexpectedly. Granite survived as displaced pieces, but machinery broke the relationship between inscriptions, sight lines, ground marker, and soil. Archaeologists depend on context, where something stood, what lay beneath it, and whether its destruction was accidental or deliberate. Without those associations, even a recent structure becomes ambiguous. Buried for 2,000 years without records, the Guidestones might have been called an observatory, legal monument, disaster memorial, or sanctuary. Each interpretation would have evidence, yet none could recover the private meeting in 1979 or the intention hidden behind R.C. Christian. That is why the Georgia Guidestones matter to ancient archaeology, despite their modern date. They show how deliberately a builder can control the story told by ruins. Their sponsor selected durable stone, universal laws, dead scripts, celestial alignments, and the suggestion of a buried archive, then removed authorship. The monument survived only 42 years, yet produced competing histories while records still existed. Its mystery is larger than its commissioner's identity. If someone could manufacture an archaeological enigma in full view of the 20th century, how many ancient monuments tell us not what their makers truly believed, but what they wanted distant strangers to believe about them? The Oklo natural nuclear reactor known as the only confirmed place where self-sustaining nuclear fission began without human intervention, left behind no chamber, machinery, or recognizable core. What survives beneath Gabon resembles a ruined archaeological site whose artifacts are atoms. Nearly 2 billion years later, microscopic minerals still preserve the reactor's rhythm and events that continued after its final shutdown. Its basic cause is understood. The deeper mystery is how scientists can reconstruct a system rewritten by water, heat, mining, and geological time. The investigation began in 1972 with a number that appeared slightly wrong. Uranium ore sent from Gabon to a French processing plant contained about 0.717% uranium-235, below the roughly 0.720% expected in natural uranium at the time. The difference was tiny, yet nuclear material was measured too carefully to dismiss it. Tests ruled out processed fuel and showed that the ore was natural. Neodymium, samarium, ruthenium, xenon, and other elements then appeared in proportions characteristic of fission. Part of the uranium-235 had not disappeared. It had been consumed in chain reactions before complex life existed. 2 billion years ago, uranium-235 formed close to 3% of natural uranium because it decays faster than uranium-238. Oxygen helped mobilize uranium, groundwater transported it through sedimentary rocks, and chemical conditions concentrated it into thick deposits. Water entering fractures slowed the neutrons released by fission, allowing them to split more uranium-235 nuclei. Yet these ingredients do not restore the lost geometry of the ore, the roots of groundwater, or the barriers that made one body critical while neighboring rock remained inactive. Oklo was not one furnace. Multiple reaction zones developed with different uranium concentrations, water supplies, and geological histories. Activity may have persisted intermittently for hundreds of thousands of years, but it did not continue steadily. Its operating clock was discovered inside xenon, a noble gas expected to escape easily. Using selective laser extraction and ion-counting mass spectrometry, researchers examined xenon and krypton held in uranium-free aluminum phosphate minerals. Their isotopic pattern matched neither the atmosphere nor the yield expected from uranium-235 fission. The minerals appeared to have recorded only selected moments. Radioactive iodine and tellurium produced during fission decay into xenon isotopes at different rates. Their surviving proportions revealed a cycle of approximately 30 minutes of activity, followed by about 2.5 hours of dormancy. Groundwater entered the uranium-rich zone and moderated neutrons, allowing fission to accelerate. Heat then boiled away or displaced the water, removing the moderator and stopping the reaction. As the rocks cooled, water returned and the sequence restarted. Oklo behaved like a buried geyser with a nuclear pulse, regulated by the repeated loss and return of water. That explanation creates another question. Much of the xenon survived not in the uranium minerals where fission occurred, but in aluminum phosphate that may have formed when hot water altered the zone. Soluble radioactive precursors moved through the rock and became sealed inside new minerals as they decayed. Why those grains retained noble gases through later heating, groundwater circulation, and nearly half the age of Earth remains incompletely understood at the microscopic level. Nor is it certain that the 30-minute rhythm characterized every reaction zone. The isotopes are not a complete diary, but scattered pages selected by mineral chemistry. The least familiar chapter began after shutdown. A study of reactor zone 13 identified uranium with a uranium-235 to uranium-238 ratio of only 0.3655%, among the most depleted natural material ever measured. Isotope imaging also found fission-derived cesium and barium inside microscopic aggregates of ruthenium metal and sulfides. Most of these mobile elements had escaped elsewhere, but the aggregates retained enough evidence to date when they became closed systems. Their isotopic isochrons gave a closure time of 4.98, plus or minus 0.56, years after criticality ended. The chain reaction was over, yet its chemical aftermath continued for almost 5 years. Radioactive precursors decayed, cesium and barium migrated through altered ore, and a fraction was finally caught in mineral traps. Those 5 years turned Oklo from a story of ignition into a forensic investigation of death. What temperature remained after the last pulse? How rapidly did groundwater cool? Which fractures carried dissolved elements away? And why did ruthenium aggregates capture material lost by surrounding minerals? The ancient water table has vanished. Mining disturbed several zones, and 2 billion years of alteration overprinted the evidence. Scientists can identify where isotopes ended, but reversing that distribution into one exact history remains difficult. Many fission products and actinides stayed near their host minerals. Others migrated only tens of meters. Xenon and krypton escaped more readily. Oklo was neither perfectly sealed nor freely leaking. This uneven preservation made the site a laboratory for underground nuclear waste storage. It shows that rocks can immobilize some radioactive products for geological spans, but retention depends on the element, mineral host, water chemistry, temperature, and fractures. Oklo offers remarkable evidence, but never a complete reconstruction. No evidence requires a vanished civilization, and calling Oklo an ancient machine would weaken the real mystery. Nature assembled a reactor, regulated it with water, transformed its minerals, redistributed its radioactive products, and then erased nearly all the arrangement needed to observe it directly. Scientists recovered a 30-minute pulse from xenon and a 5-year postscript from cesium and barium imprisoned in ruthenium. Yet they cannot replay every route taken by the fluids or know whether other natural reactors once operated before erosion, metamorphism, or subduction destroyed their signatures. Oklo is not the ruin of forgotten technology. It is something stranger, a geological event whose smallest surviving fragments remember time more accurately than the landscape that once contained it. Skara Brae is known as the Pompeii of Scotland, a Neolithic village whose stone beds, hearths, cupboards, and passages appear to preserve one interrupted moment of life. The image began in 1850, when a violent storm stripped sand from a mound beside the Bay of Scale in Orkney. Landowner William Graham Watt began clearing rooms still furnished in stone. Yet closer examination created a different mystery. The village visible now may combine buildings separated by centuries, while the original settlement has been excavated away, left underground, or carried into the Atlantic. Radiocarbon evidence places occupation broadly between 3180 and 2500 BC, roughly 6 centuries. Houses were built, inhabited, abandoned, dismantled, and rebuilt, sometimes directly above older structures. Test trenches revealed masonry beneath the exposed buildings, while deposits reached about 2 meters deep in places. The plan seen from above therefore hides a vertical history. A wall from one period may stand beside a room reshaped generations later, and some houses may never have been occupied together. The apparent village could instead be the upper surface of a long process in which successive communities reconstructed the same place. The houses were set within midden containing ash, animal bone, shell, pottery, and organic refuse. It insulated rooms from Orkney's wind and damp, but also surrounded new homes with remains of earlier occupation. Much was discarded during early clearing, and looters removed an unknown quantity of artifacts in 1913. When Vere Gordon Child began systematic excavation in 1927, the monument had already been altered by digging, erosion, and theft. Many relationships among walls, objects, and human remains are now irrecoverable. House 7 turns that lost sequence into the site's most unsettling question. Beneath its floor, and partly beneath a wall, excavators discovered a stone-lined grave containing 2 female skeletons. Their position shows that the burial preceded at least part of the building. The builders knowingly placed a house over the dead. Child described it as a possible foundation deposit, but that term cannot explain who the women were or why a domestic-looking structure required them. They may have been ancestors whose presence established a claim to the settlement. House 7 may have functioned as a memorial occupied by the living or a restricted place designed like an ordinary dwelling. Geometric markings also appear on stones inside, although their meaning is unknown. There is no evidence of sacrifice, but the deliberate union of grave, wall, and living floor makes a purely domestic interpretation difficult. House 8 breaks the pattern differently. Standing apart from the midden-packed cluster, it had walls more than 2 meters thick, but lacked the familiar dresser and storage boxes. Excavators recovered stone, bone, and antler fragments, heat-affected volcanic rock, and a possible flue. These traces suggest a workshop, yet its massive construction seems excessive for an ordinary workroom. If valued objects were produced there, House 8 may have controlled both skilled production and specialist knowledge. Craft and ritual need not have been separate. The building used the settlement's architectural language while rejecting the interior of a home. That normal interior is itself strangely repetitive. Most houses place a hearth between stone beds, with storage compartments in the walls and a stone dresser directly opposite the entrance. Anyone entering through the low doorway immediately faced it, suggesting that the dresser displayed pottery, ornaments, or possessions through which a household presented its identity. Nearly the same arrangement was reproduced throughout the settlement. A larger bed generally occupied one side and a smaller bed the other. Drains ran beneath at least 5 houses, although the full system has never been mapped. Doors secured with wooden or whalebone bars allowed privacy within a community linked by covered passages. The architecture combined conformity with controlled access, but whether that order expressed equality, kinship, ritual prescription, or an inherited model of society remains unresolved. The artifacts reveal a capable, connected community. Thousands of bone objects included needles, pins, beads, pendants, and tools, while grooved-ware pottery tied Skara Brae to a wider Neolithic world. Patterns on carved stone balls and incised slabs cannot securely be classified as writing, ownership marks, decoration, or ritual symbols. Waterlogged layers preserved heather cord and a wooden handle, showing how much organic evidence vanished. Animal bones, fish, shellfish, and barley indicate a mixed economy. These houses were durable social statements repeatedly reconstructed to a shared design. The greatest missing section may now lie beyond the seawall. Skara Brae was probably farther from the open sea during the Neolithic, perhaps beside dunes and a protected lagoon. Coastal erosion destroyed an unknown portion before its discovery, while remains continue beneath nearby fields and appear in eroding ground south of the monument. No one can establish its original boundary, population, or arrangement. The 10 visible structures and 4 passageways might represent its center, its edge, or one surviving episode of a much larger settlement. Every interpretation rests on a fragment, selected not by its builders, but by sand, water, and early excavation.